When a game is going downhill for your team, you will often find yourself struggling to find your way back into it, and depending on which character you're playing, you may struggle a little more or less. In today's video, we'll talk about the 7 worst guards from behind. From behind in this case refers to being behind in a gold or farm or maybe in structures, so you can do the low-key and the sexual jokes in the comment section down below if you want to, but that's not what we're talking about. Also, it goes without saying that this is obviously just my opinion. I know that some of you will think that other guards are way worse from behind, and I will mention some of these guards maybe, but maybe I will not put them in my personal top 7 here. If you disagree, feel free to comment down below what you think would be different in your top 7 guards. And with that out of the way, let's get started. On place number 7, we have Zeus. Now, most mages are actually kind of okay when being played from behind. They usually bring a fair bit of CC to the battleground, and they also have those game-changing team fight ultimates, which can still be important even if you fall behind a little bit. With Zeus, well, you still have a nice ultimate, but if it only tickles the enemies, then it doesn't do all too much. Zeus very much lives off bursting an enemy down, and if you don't burst the enemy down, then he's kinda out of options. He also does not have good escape tools, he doesn't have good CC tools, so it's very easy to collapse on if he ends up being on a lower level than the rest. At the same time, he is still a mage and he still has some range, so he's not gonna make the top 1 here. The next one on the list, on spot number 6, is Cabrakan. Cabrakan really struggles when he falls behind. He is very strong at the moment, so he can kinda get away with it for a bit, but Cabrakan really is a character that is designed to be ahead in the beginning of the game. That's what makes him so strong. And if he doesn't fulfill that niche, he quickly struggles a lot. This is down to the fact that Cabrakan is a guardian, so he has to frontline, he has to be in the thick of things all the time, but his CC in general is mostly single target focused, while it can hit multiple targets. And so somebody else can still attack you while you're attacking someone else. You have to be in the enemy's face to hit almost all your abilities, so you really have to constantly push up towards the enemy, being in their face and also taking more damage that way. And 2 of the abilities that he has revolve around kind of keeping the enemy near you. His tremors will allow the enemy to focus you down with everything they have, because you are basically rooted in place as long as you do it. And if it doesn't do enough damage to deter them from attacking you right away, and they can just take you down while you use it, then you have a big problem. Likewise, his ultimate will basically put the enemies in some sort of a cage with you, at least to some extent, because you kind of have to body block a bit while they're in the walls surrounding them. And if you can't really tank the damage in that moment, then you become pretty much useless, because the enemy might as well focus you instead of one of the walls. In spot number 5, we have Plush. Now, Plush kinda falls in the same niche as Zeus here, only that he's off even worse. Not only is Plush generally not considered the strongest character out there, to put it nicely, but he also doesn't have the same amount of range with his ultimate. While his kit generally has some range, it doesn't really do that much damage, and the ultimate itself is also more reliant on tick damage, so his whole impact comes over time in an extended fight, and he can kind of sustain himself in that fight if he gets the option to. But if he just gets bursted before all of that happens, then, well, tough luck. And given the fact that he doesn't have an escape in his kit, getting bursted is kind of likely. So focusing on a Plush is almost always going to guarantee you an almost free kill, unless he is ahead. So a Plush from behind really struggles. And that brings us to the last magical character on this list. And this one used to be a guardian, is now a mage. Hades. Hades kinda suffers from everything the characters that I mentioned before have, only combined. His ultimate kinda in a way functions like Cabrakan's tremors, just that it pulls the enemies towards you. So if your ultimate doesn't do a lot of damage, the enemies will just focus you down. Yes, you get some protections and all, but that's definitely not enough to help you when you've already fallen behind and the enemy team can just focus you down because you're not moving. The rest of his kit also forces him to engage, like the 1 does require you to go into the enemy, basically like a leap. Then the 3 requires the same thing, and the 2 is also really close range. So while you're generally kind of squishy, and depending on how you build, you might be like leaning more towards a mage build than a guardian build, you also have the issue of having to be in the enemy's face. So basically, you come down to this point where you are an untanky Cabrakan and a mage that has to be closer than anyone else. And that really doesn't mix with falling behind in this game at all. Before we get to the top 3, let's talk about the other magical characters that didn't make it into the list, but are kinda down there with them as well. The first one here would be Anubis, who has to root himself in a place in order to use his abilities, and doesn't really have mobility either. He's kinda in the same place as Plush and Zeus are. In my opinion, he does a little bit better because his damage, even from behind, is still very, very high, and he can still punish someone for becoming too greedy that way, just by dropping his stun and his ultimate and hoping for the best by blasting it into the enemy's face. It's a bit more likely to get a kill, but he's not doing much better. Also, the lifesteal obviously helps him a little bit. Another one is Freya. Now, Freya, I think, kind of falls in the same category as pretty much all ADCs. She can't really fall behind too much because there's always a chance to come back late game. She still struggles because she doesn't have the same mobility as many others, so she has to use her ultimate to escape, but she still at least has the ultimate in the banish, which will allow her to be safe even when falling behind and not being much of a threat. The problem is that a Freya that falls behind too much is really not much of a threat, but still there are others that are off worse. There's also Habois, who's kinda in the same place as Hades in a way, a really squishy mage, but needs to get really up into his enemies' faces in order to be effective. I do believe that he has more impact through his ultimate though. Even when behind, it still deals very high amounts of damage, and it allows you to reposition yourself, which I think gives him a bit of an advantage over the, in my opinion, worst 7. Capri is another one of those who could easily get into the category because his pluck requires him to get really close to the enemy. He can get hit while he is pulling an enemy, and he also does have that ultimate which kind of makes him bait for the enemy team, and if he is too low leveled, then they will just go for him and force him to put the ultimate on himself. At the same time, he still has that ultimate, and that's a benefit from him in the first place when behind, because that ultimate will always be strong, and that's the reason why he wouldn't make the list for me. Poseidon, I think, could be close to Zeus, for example. The little benefit that he has here is that his Whirlpool is still very decent crowd control, and his Kraken is a little easier to use to just scare off an enemy because of the immediate damage. So I will give him a bit of an advantage here. Also, his movement speed is usually pretty nice when he uses this too. Last but not least, there are healers in general in the magical category that I think can't really fit in the worst gods from behind because they're healers. Yes, somebody like Sylvanas can be easily focused down, and that is a big problem for him and really his weak point, and if he falls behind that way, he will fall behind more and more and more. But healers will always have an impact in team fights as long as the rest of the team is like slightly okay at least. Heals are such a strong component to the game that you will need a lot of anti-heal to counter that, and that's just goes beyond what a team being ahead means. So as such, I will exclude the healers here, even though some of them really struggle with falling behind. And that brings us to spot number 3. This one goes to Arachne. Arachne being a melee character that really thrives off sticking to the enemy, chasing them down, dealing a lot of damage in a short amount of time, really needs to be ahead. She is the definition of a snowball god, and when she snowballs in a game, she does really well. But if she does not snowball and she falls behind, she loses almost all impact. She is not mobile enough to get out of most situations. You can easily force her ultimate. She has to connect to the enemy to get her sustain going and get her kit in general going, even his CC. So that all really requires her to stay ahead, and if that doesn't work, she has a huge problem. In spot number 2, we have someone who is very closely related to her. It's another assassin. It's Nadja. Now Nadja is all in or bust. With Nadja, you want to kill someone with your ultimate. If you don't have enough damage to kill someone with your ultimate, you have a problem. Yeah, sometimes you can get the combo off with the 2, the basics afterwards or whatever, and get the kill, but if you fall behind, this all gets more and more unlikely. And if you're Nadja, you only have your sash to engage. You don't have an escape tool like that. You can waste your ultimate to escape, but even that is not the best of escape tools because it can easily be body blocked. And other than that, you're just in the enemy team the moment you use the sash, and you have no way to get away unless you kill all of them or your team comes in. And that means that he is pretty bad when he actually falls behind. It takes a little more for Nadja to fall behind because he can kind of come back with his ultimate sometimes, but if he really falls behind, it is rough out there. Before we get to number 1, let's quickly talk about some of the physical gods that didn't make the list. Amazon Cup, I think, is just slightly too good for being among the worst. He is an immobile ADC, so to speak, because he doesn't really have an escape, and he's very much reliant on his strong 1v1 boxing, and when he falls behind, he doesn't really have that anymore. but he still has a little bit more mobility and sustain through his hives than some others, and he's still an ADC, so that kind of puts him above them. Likewise, Artemis, still an ADC, can have a lot of crit luck, and with crit luck she can always come back into a fight, even though it looks like she might be using it, and she has got like good crowd control with her ultimate, so she's alright. Awilish, I do think is pretty bad from behind, but not quite as bad as others. She's more bad when she's situationally countered by cripples or something like that. She can still have an impact, she can still pull targets into your team even when in a bad spot. It's just a lot harder and a lot more problematic for her. Then there are the split putters, Bakasura, Loki, Skadi. I think even if they're behind and they are weak in fights from behind, they still have the split push, and that's why they can always come back in another way. There is Kali, who really relies on getting her farm, but I think Kali has the potential to always come back just through that one lucky kill on her target, and that will fully heal her and can completely turn around a team fight even when you're way deep into the game. So because she's a hyper carry and because she has that option to come back, I do think that she doesn't deserve a spot on the list. The last one is Odin. Odin does not do much damage or anything from behind, but his cage will always have a certain amount of impact, and as such, I think he does not deserve a spot on the list either. The, in my opinion, worst god from behind in the game is somebody who I think quite a few of you will find debatable, will probably not agree with. I will say it anyways. For me, it's Raven. The problem with Raven is that he's generally not performing all too well in the meta at the moment anyways, but Raven thrives off of being a lane bully. He doesn't do much coming into late game, he doesn't do the same kind of crowd control AoE as other warriors do in late game, so his benefit comes from winning lane. If you don't win lane and you fall behind, then your impact is gonna be incredibly low. Raven is supposed to dive the backline in team fights, that's all he can really do. Lock down the enemies for a bit, he has his root, he has his slow, which is already not much CC to begin with. And that's what he does, that's all he can really do for a team fight. His team fight impact is just not there. And if Raven cannot take 1v1s in the backline anymore, trades in the backline anymore because he just gets bursted by the backline before that happens, because he fell behind, then he has no purpose. What is he supposed to do? He can't split push well, he will probably get punished by the other solo for farming, for trying to get back into the game, and everything just kind of works against him. And as such, he makes my number one on the list of the top worst gods from behind. With that, thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I hope to see you for the next one tomorrow. Also, I'll be streaming today a fair bit, so if you're seeing the video right as it's uploaded or later during the day, you might just stop by on my stream and see me. And thank you guys so much for 50,000 subscribers. This is just a first thank you to all of you. Video on that soon. Duke Sloth, out.